Did I explain the remittance basis?
No, but I assumed you were about to.
Yes, I am going to. Yeah. UK tax system is based really on two principles, residence and domicile. But let's go through the changes as the Tories announced. Relevance of domicile in working out your UK tax liability is going to go, and we're effectively just going to concentrate on residence. Look at your existing arrangement, structure, timelines, etc. And if the proposals get enacted as we think they might, what would the impact be for you?
Hello, Leonie. How are you?
I'm very well. Hi, Zaid.
So we're here to talk about tax changes or proposed tax changes in respect of the UK non-dom regime. And interestingly, we are speaking in the aftermath of the result.
Yep.
Right? And I think we should come back to that because there are some ramifications, right, as a result of the election.
Yes.
But as we'll come to talk about, broadly speaking, there is some agreement on what changes are likely to occur. But before we get into any of those, for our viewers, what does non-domicile actually mean?
Okay. How long have we got? Okay. So if I just explain the content. So UK tax system is based really on two principles, residence and domicile. Residence is very much a day count, physical presence, where are you at any point in time, combined a little bit with your ties to the UK. So do your family live there? Do you have a house there? Do you work in the UK? And you go through a test and you work out whether you're resident or non-resident. And that's relatively straightforward. Domicile, I always think of it like a heart and homeland test. So where do you really belong? You know, you might live in the UK for 20 years, but that's not your home. You're always going to go back somewhere else. And generally, your domicile is dictated by where your father or sometimes your grandfather were born. So you take those two as a combination, your resident status and your domicile status, and that dictates effectively, with a little bit of choice from you, how you're taxed in the UK.
Is it what you're describing sounds a bit subjective and a bit woolly? Is it subjective or woolly?
It's tricky. I don't want to do my job down. It is tricky. The residents, we have a very clear statutory test.
We do now.
We do
We
now.
haven't always had that,
no,
have we?
2013,
Yeah.
I think. 2013 it came in, and you work your way through. Still a little bit of subjectivity occasionally, but you work your way through.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that's always difficult, the HMRC, the UK tax authorities, have tests around full-time working. But I think they're a little bit behind the times because they think you do a full week's work on 35 hours, okay? Whereas you could have an entrepreneur nowadays who does 5 hours in the week and makes 20 times as much as anyone who does a 35-hour week.
So that legislation hasn't necessarily kept up with working practices.
Correct.
But I think nonetheless, I think what you're saying is there's greater clarity on residency.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
But why is it important in the context of UK tax?
Because, right, once you've established the resident status, so you're UK resident, and now we're going to establish your domicile status. And let's say that we take you as an example. I don't know where your father was born, your grandfather, but let's say you're not UK domiciled, but you live in the UK. So by making a claim, you can say, I'm going to be taxed on my UK income and my UK gains. So if I sell a UK property, I might be taxed on that gain, or I have employment in the UK, I'll be taxed. But if I sell a property in France, unless I bring the money to the UK, I can elect to be taxed just on my UK income and leave my French gain outside the UK tax net.
Right.
I might pay tax in France, but not necessarily in the UK.
How long has this concept of non-dom been around for? Where does it even come from?
Probably 150 years or so, the whole concept of domicile. Its roots, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyone can go Google, guys, if you're out there.
Yeah,
But,
they can.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's been around for a long time. It's been regularly in the headlines, you know, for the last few years, probably for the last 15 years. You know, are there going to be changes made? There were some very wide-ranging changes in 2017 that curtailed a little bit the the tax system, about how a non-domicile was taxed, and everyone thought that would be it. And then obviously the Tories earlier this year in their budget came out with this sweeping announcement about all the changes that they were going to make to the whole tax system for non-doms.
Who's benefited from this? Because we hear about all these non-dom individuals, the newspapers are always talking about it. Who are these people? How have they benefited from this regime? And how has it shaped the way, I guess, they live or they work or they invest in the UK?
The range of people who are non-doms and can take advantage of the tax regime that goes with it is really broad. I mean, a guy from France who comes to work for an investment bank in London, he'll be a non-dom. So he might let a property in France or Spain or anywhere else. If he doesn't bring the money to the UK, he might not be taxed on it in the UK. Then you go all the way up, the scale through to, without being political, Rishi Sunak's wife, supposedly is a non-dom. I mean, it's actually quite hard to tell just by looking at someone whether they are a non-dom or not, and you can make some sweeping assumptions about people. And at the moment in the UK, we don't disclose our tax returns. I mean, some countries do, Scandinavian countries, etc., but I'm not sure we're going to go there anytime soon.
Who knows? Very good.
Yeah.
Do we know, well, first of all, what are the changes, I guess, or what are the proposed changes? And then do we know if the current government, as it's shortly about to be formed, is going to update, revise, or do we have a sense of that?
So let's go through the changes as the Tories announced. So the first off, the relevance of domicile in working out your UK tax liability is going to go. And we're effectively just going to concentrate on residence. So where you have someone who's been outside, these are proposals, please remember, that we've got no legislation, so just proposals.
Okay.
Where you've got an individual who's been outside the UK for 10 years, non-resident for 10 years, and it doesn't matter whether they're originally a Brit or a Peruvian or a Brazilian or wherever they come from, the first 4 years you go to the UK as a resident, your foreign income and gains, whether you bring them to the UK or not, are going to be tax-free.
Okay.
Okay? So that's one. So I've been out of the UK coming up 11 years. So assuming the legislation gets enacted the way I've just said, when I go back to the UK, assuming I had assets and income offshore, they would be tax-free. Okay, for 4 years. Then the second point is the people who've been on what's called the remittance basis. Did I explain the remittance basis?
No, I didn't, but I assumed you were about to.
Yes, I am going to, yeah. So the remittance basis was that if you're living in the UK as a non-domiciled individual, the point I made about your offshore income and gains weren't taxable. You had to make a claim to be taxed on the remittance basis. So it was only when you bought something to the UK...
When you remitted it, in effect.
Yes, correct, that you would be taxed on it, okay? So where you've previously been a remittance basis user and you've taken advantage of that regime, then the proposals were that for 25-26 tax year and 26-27 tax year, anything you bought to the UK that you'd previously kept offshore would only be taxed at 12%.
Okay. So is this a kind of transitionary thing?
Yes.
So we're saying we move from one system to another. We're creating this, does it feel like a bit of an amnesty? I don't know. It feels like quite a low rate.
It's called a TRF, a temporary repatriation facility.
Okay. So it's an invitation to people in a kind of tax advantageous way to bring in assets onshore into the UK.
Yes.
Okay. Understood. And that's what, on gains or on...
Any income and gains.
Income and gains.
Yes, that's
12% flat rate.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, okay.
Seems
but you've
good.
only got 2 years, a 2-year window to bring it in.
Got you.
Okay. Then the second proposal for people moving from that remittance basis to a worldwide basis of tax is that 50%, they could bring 50% of their foreign income earned in 25-26, i.e. the year to the 5th of April 2026.
It's hard to keep up with these years, isn't it?
It's really difficult, whether I'm starting or finishing. So they could bring income in that year and only only 50% of the income would be taxed in the UK.
Okay.
Now that actually brings with it some potential complications because income is taxed at different rates in the UK, whether it's savings income or dividend income or the source of the income, and sometimes you might have paid tax overseas on that income. So how anyone, and in fact I'm going to negate what I say in a minute, but how anyone would work out which 50% of my income, what is it that I'm bringing in? That was the Tories' proposal. Labour have said they don't like that.
Interesting. Well, it sounds complicated.
Well, and
so the fact
actually,
that it might not happen
might be a good thing.
might be a good thing.
We might end up with less pages of legislation than we normally get after these changes. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the third
Yeah.
relief for people moving for this basis is that overseas assets, so property or stocks and shares or I don't know, what other assets can you have overseas? You can elect for the starting point, if you sell those assets, to be their value at April 2019.
Effectively, their cost base.
Yes.
Right. So if you're trying to determine a capital gain on a stock for a property, right?
Yeah. And we haven't seen the detail yet, so we don't know if it's an asset by asset basis or whether you have to make a blanket election. We've had changes in the past where it had to be every asset, whether it was beneficial or not. And it's slightly odd. I don't know why April 2019 has been chosen for that.
Interesting.
There's more.
There are more. Oh, go on.
So then I haven't touched inheritance tax yet.
Okay.
So inheritance tax is generally a tax on people's assets at the date of their passing. Okay, and there's various reliefs you can make, and also on some lifetime gifts, inheritance tax can apply. Now, again, this has previously been based on domicile. So if you were UK domiciled, your worldwide assets are potentially within the scope of inheritance tax.
Right.
If you weren't UK domiciled, only your UK assets would be within the scope of inheritance tax.
They have this concept of situs assets, don't they?
So if you've got a UK property, for example, that's going to be in the UK. And in fact, residential property, whether you own it through an offshore company or however you own it, is always in the scope of inheritance tax.
Right.
Yeah. But shares, for example, shares in a UK company listed on the UK Stock Exchange would be UK situs assets. Got you.
So all of this, all your UK assets were exposed regardless.
Yes.
But if you were non-dom, potentially your international estate, you could avoid IHT, inheritance tax.
Yes, which at 40% is quite a significant number.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, we're moving away from the domicile and we're looking more at a residence type test. So once you've been resident in the UK, so you arrived in the UK in, 2013, once you've been resident in the UK for 10 years, your worldwide estate will come into the scope of inheritance tax.
Right.
Once you leave the UK, once you've left for more than 10 years, you can be outside the scope. And it's, again, only your UK assets will be caught for inheritance tax.
At that point.
Yes.
Okay. Is that it? Are there more?
There's a tiny bit more around trusts.
Yes.
So a lot of people use trusts because the world is a litigious place. They don't know about, whether family marriages are going to be successful, whether kids maybe go off the rails a little bit, and they want to protect their hard-earned wealth for the benefit of the family and future generations. So they set up a trust. And at the moment, subject to getting certain things right in terms of how the trust is set up, etc., if you're a non-domiciled individual living in the UK and your trust and the assets are outside the UK, you won't be taxed on the income or the gains of the trust. And for inheritance tax purposes, those assets are outside the scope of inheritance tax.
That was the case, or that will continue
That's
to be
the
the case?
case today.
Yes.
What the Tories said was that if the settlor of the trust, so let's say you set up the trust.
Right. The settlor is the person who
set it up, put the
puts
assets
the money in, really.
in the first place. If you're living in the UK, you're going to be taxed on the income and gains in that trust, regardless of whether you bring them to the UK, whether they're paid out of the trust, that you're taxed as if they were yours directly.
Right.
But the inheritance tax benefit that you had, or you currently have, that will be preserved.
Because they don't like inheritance tax, the Conservatives, do they?
No, but Labour had already said that they would also get rid of the inheritance tax benefit for the trust.
So in effect, those trusts that these non-domiciled individuals were using previously, if they, under the new legislation where domicile doesn't matter anymore and residence is what matters, would be ineffective in providing them with any relief on inheritance tax.
Yes, they're still effective in terms of asset protection from creditors or from, wayward kids, but for tax, they would
no longer be effective.
Correct.
Right, and what it comes down to, if I'm listening, is this kind of 10-year thing, right?
Can I make a point about the 10-year thing?
Please.
Right. So let's use you as an example, and let's say you're non-domiciled, okay, but you've been living in the UK for 20 years. So you're now what's called deemed domiciled for tax purposes only. So previously, once you'd been in the UK for 15 out of 20 years, you became deemed domiciled. So as if you were UK domiciled.
Right. They accept that your domicile may be elsewhere, but they're treating you as if you're domiciled in the UK.
Correct. Now, under the current legislation, if you left the UK, let's say on the last day of the tax year, which I hope I get right now, 5th of April 2025, after 3 years, you could potentially lose that deemed domicile status and get out of the inheritance tax net, provided you then didn't return to the UK for another 3 years. Okay?
Right.
But after 3 years, that tail is gone and you're out. Under the new rules, if you leave the UK on the 6th of April 2025, sorry, not the new proposed rules, 6th of April 2025, you've got to be out of the UK 10 years before you lose that inheritance tax.
What if you leave on the 5th of April?
That's good.
Wow.
Then you're 3 years to 10.
Okay.
Versus 10.
Well, this was going to be something I was going to come on to ask about, because you said so at the beginning. We don't know what people are going to do. And many people will say, I'm in the UK. I've been in the UK for many years.
Yeah.
This is where my home is. This may be where my kids go to school. Accept that I'm going to have to pay more tax than I was paying before. I'm not going anywhere. But there may be some people who say, look, maybe there are alternatives. Maybe I want to go live elsewhere. I've always aspired to live elsewhere. This may be a good trigger or a good catalyst for me to think about. And there are lots of places, obviously, in the world that people may be considering moving to. Given these changes, what do you imagine these individuals should be thinking about? What are the considerations, right?
Yeah. It's all very easy to talk about leaving the UK and moving, etc. But where you're settled, you've got your kids in the right schools, it might have taken a few goes to get that right, where you've got your house, your business you've set up, etc. Just making the suggestion, why don't you leave the UK? It's not a simple decision.
Clearly.
No. And I have a lot of conversations with clients and just friends and people I know about what they're going to do. I'd make a couple of points. Firstly, we don't have legislation, and I can't emphasise that enough. But I still think people should be thinking about what they might do. So I've had a couple of conversations where, in this case, it's the husband who's been employed, got the business, maybe got the assets, and the wife is, more sorting out the family, doing the harder job, actually, guys, to be honest. But and on 2 occasions, the husbands have said, the kids need another 2 years in school in the UK. Can't move them now. Bad timing, whatever the age is, can't move them. But I'm probably going to leave before April 2025. So I don't fall into that 10-year net, and I'm 3 years. Then, let's say they're coming to Dubai, and Dubai's got a big pull factor to it. It's a very, very attractive place to live. So let's say I base myself in Dubai, 7 hours to the UK. There's 12, 14 flights a day.
At least.
Yeah, I can go back, or I can go meet the family in France or in Spain or in Portugal. They'll come out here because, kids and, especially in the winter months, love Dubai. So people have got choices, but the choices aren't always very easy to make. But when the stark reality is another 7 years, particularly if you're planning in the next few years to leave the UK in any event, I think people will think seriously about going before April.
You touch upon an important issue, because this has been part of the debate. There's a lot of people who think that the benefit of these non-dom rules have been that they have brought wealthier, successful people into the UK, and that wealthy people create jobs. This is this kind of trickle-down concept that some people subscribe to. And then people talk about wealthy people as being flexible as to where they live, that they can potentially, the technical term is people talk about capital flight. The reality is many people's circumstances will not allow for them to do that, but there will invariably be some people who either they've been thinking about it before, or because now there's a push or a catalyst, are going to be considering this move. And I think what you're saying is, to the extent that there are people in that mindset, notwithstanding that the legislation has not been clarified, these people should start to think about whether it makes sense, therefore. And that watershed moment is in April next year.
Yes, yeah. Because these decisions aren't made quickly. You consult with family, you consult with advisors, you want to try out a place. There are options. Dubai isn't, I say to people, come to Dubai, but Dubai isn't the only option by any means. But a lot of these people are internationally quite mobile in any event. They regularly spend time in different countries because they might have properties in different countries. And maybe you can see it as not being too difficult to say, okay, I could keep my UK days below whatever the number is. And I don't want to give a number, because everyone will go, I can spend X days in the UK without being resident. But it is possible to achieve that and maybe just change your lifestyle a little bit so you're no longer resident in the UK, but you can still be there for the important family events, for example. The end of terms or the the play your children, that your kids are in, or anything like that.
Right.
You can
These
still
are tough
do
decisions that I think many
They
families
are
are going to be wrestling with.
Yeah.
And today, Sanctuary is part of Summit Group, and Summit Group has offices worldwide. Returning back to the UAE, have you started to see these conversations occurring? Are people thinking about, do you get the sense that there will be many families, many people looking to move to the UAE?
Yes, conversations are increasing. I don't think people are moving yet. I think a big move to the UAE started just post-COVID, or during COVID, when people realised you can work remotely. So a lot of people, maybe in their late 20s, who had set up businesses, and a lot of them were online businesses, suddenly thought, why am I sitting in some rainy place somewhere in the UK, paying tax, etc., when I could just as easily be sitting in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, doing my same business with a quality of life that feels very different, and take home more of my money than paying tax. So I think that started things, but I wouldn't say we're seeing people having moved yet, because as I say, we've got proposals, we haven't got legislation, and it's a big decision to make on a proposal, but conversations are happening.
This has been really helpful. I think it's been helpful in that we've certainly I've been able to understand a bit about what's going on. I think just to emphasize, these changes are all proposals.
Correct.
At this stage.
Yes.
And so we need to continue to watch this space.
Yeah.
It's all very fresh.
Yeah.
But what would be your message, I guess, to viewers who are looking at this, considering their steps? What would you advise them to do?
I think I would say, look at your existing arrangement, structure, timelines, etc. And if the proposals get enacted as we think they might, what would the impact be for you? Okay? And once you understand what the impact would be, I think you can then decide whether you want to do something about it or whether you're happy with the consequences. And if you want to do something about it, start to explore what that is and what the timing needs to be to make sure that it has the correct impact.
Very good. And I'm sure you're available and on hand
happy to talk
to help
to anyone.
Absolutely. That's been really helpful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Leonie.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you very much. Thanks.
We hope that you found that informative and good food for thought. We cannot emphasize enough that none of this is legislation. It is all proposed. So nonetheless, if you think that this might impact you, then please do get in touch. Details are on screen.